Mushoku Tensei is a isekai anime, but a lot of people kind of just boil it down to that. That's just the pretense of the structure which it's been developed in. Mushoku Tensei is actually about trauma, childhood, growing up, basically relationships. That's what Mushoku Tensei is about. It's about relationships with people. It's quite an interesting one. It goes into areas which most animes aren't really privy to usually. So we see adultery and we see gunning at each other and not understanding things, and the world sets up this weird structure around death as well, which we don't usually have in our world, which, you know, when someone dies, it's seen quite as a big thing, right? We kind of react to that in quite a serious way, but in Mushoku Tensei, death is all around. And so when people die, it's less on the chin. It's more on the chin for them, I should say, actually. And it's kind of crazy, but at the same time, it creates for these really interesting character developments.
It's quite a lovely looking show. Mushoku Tensei has this specific color palette that really appeals to me. It can be vibrant and bright at times, and then at other points in time, it can be bleak and dark. And it creates for this really interesting dynamic between how Rudios is feeling and how the world's treating him, changing with the actual visuals themselves. You know, things get bleak, things get great. There's snow, there's a vibrant world, and the visuals that the animation team have done a really good job of being able to visually depict that world on the screen in a beautiful manner. The characters have different looks to them. They can be a bit tropey, but they maintain this form of genuineness around them. Each face feels a little bit different than the other, right? You can tell if someone's a specific character just by looking at them. There's a lot that can be said about the work of the actual visuals, but I'll just keep it to that.
This anime does have some problems with it, a lot of it due to perversion. So perversion is quite common in this story, and it is something to kind of scoff at sometimes because it can be a little bit daring. And that's putting it lightly in some terms, and so it can be an uncomfortable watch, which is quite saddening because the show is quite well developed in all other states. You know, the animation is good, the writing is good, everything else is good, right? But the perversion, which does actually have a place within the narrative and the story, it's there for a reason, but at the same time, the visual scenes which are depicted within the show, some of them feel like they didn't need to be there, or that they went too far visually, that they shouldn't have. Maybe some of that stuff could have been cut out of the anime. It is hard to watch, but if you get past it, the show itself is worth it, right? It's just quite sad because it does take quite a lot of the screen, but that's what we, you know, kind of look at first glance. When we first glance look at something, these are the things that pop up, right? What I also quite like about this show, for the entire first season, the intros were always custom. And so you would get these really kind of snippet moments within the intros. They weren't the main priority because people were scared that you might skip the intro or not watch the intro, right? And I think the animators and directors took this into account. So they aren't any priorities in there, but there are little bits and bobs to be watched as the music is playing that kind of add to the world. They add to the world building and the structure of what's going on. And so I quite like that. I wish more animes did the same kind of thing, you know? It's quite kind of hard to find that kind of thing in newer age animes because they're always got a preset intro, preset music, and things can be quite surface level at times. But the intro is actually a really good opportunity. And I don't think people really see that. It's an opportunity for you to be able to lay over like a really good track, right? Something that's had a lot of time and thought put into it, and use the space to actually add to your world. It keeps you invested, even if the music is still playing. You don't feel like you have to come out of the show to then go back in it by skipping the intro or having to watch all the way through it, grabbing a cup of coffee or something like that, right? In a lot of animes, I see there's a lot of thinking going on with the main characters, right? But the thinking themselves, the characters don't really question themselves too much anymore. I've noticed in current day animes where it's just kind of to the viewer, right? The monologuing itself doesn't actually serve a purpose for that person. It's just a monologue of like character explanation or something like that for the viewer, right? But in Mushoku Tensei, it's quite the opposite. It's both. Can be to monologue to the viewer to have some basic understanding. And in the first couple of episodes of the show, it does tend to explain in this form. But at the same time, for Rudios' mind, we actually do see quite a lot of change from him in his own head. Something that isn't seen by the other characters, and it really lets us into a deeper level of his character. And so in that sense, the the internal monologuing actually does serve a purpose in this show, and it's quite nice to see that. It's quite refreshing. There's a lot of moments of second guessing in Mushoku Tensei. There's certain elements where he'll do something and he realizes he's messed up, or that maybe he's affected someone in the wrong way and it's given him a bit of a downturn, right? Good example is there was one time he gets back with his father after something big happened, and the father says something to him and he actually has to internalize it, right? He hears it, it causes a disrupt, and he goes and sits, and then he internalizes what was said to him via the monologuing and gets over it, right? And so that's quite nice to see, because in most animes, that the actual form of the monologue is quite, as I've said before, surface level, but it doesn't actually change anything. It's just the monologue. They're just monologuing. There's no thought process really going behind the monologue. It's just them thinking what's happening out loud. Once again, it's also another form of missed opportunities. I'm happy to see a show that finally does actually convey that. Also, another point I'd like to make about Mushoku Tensei is that yes, it's an isekai story, and that it does have different themes, and it is about relationships, but at the same time, it's also about the progression of Rudios getting over prior traumas from his previous life. And what a lot of animes do, especially a lot of isekais, is they shove the isekai element out after the first couple of episodes. It gets lost. It's just something to get you hooked into the world as a power trip. It happens in the first episode, the character dies, and then that's really it. But the great thing about Mushoku Tensei is that part stays with him. His previous world has a connection to him via his mind and his traumas, and sometimes those traumas are actually brought to life visually. You get to see memories of his previous life and how they affected him, and he also, when speaking to certain characters in the show, goes back to his old body of his previous life. I'm kind of sad that a lot of isekais don't really take this trope, because the actual form of an isekai is quite an interesting concept. If it wasn't just used for power trips and, you know, just playing superhero, there's a lot to be worked with here. I mean, think about it. Basically, isekais in anime form is always a fantasy world, but an isekai can really be any world. It's not privy to one form, even though the industry has taken it to be so, and that's also quite a saddening thought. You think about it this way. You're taking a character which has no connection to an environment or a universe, and you're placing them in that universe from an external standpoint. Now, structurally and story-wise, there's a lot that can be worked with that dynamic, but it sells a lot, right? Which is why they do it. But I think what's better than creating a surface-level show which takes a trope like this and infuses it with just power tripness and goes for 12 episodes and not everyone kind of forgets about it afterwards, won't make as much money as a show which really blows people away. What I also like about Mushoku Tensei is that the characters themselves also go through a lot of pain, pleasure, and hardship. They're not one-dimensional. A lot of, you know, in a lot of animes, characters tend to be one-dimensional people. They tend to have their certain X personality and Y actions, and that is how they go. But not in Mushoku Tensei. In Mushoku Tensei, people can be an arrogant asshole to your face but care about you behind. They could also be a horrible, horrible parental figure that's just trying to be strong through pain. You know, anime should have these things in them. They should have multi-dimensional characters which have to go through stories and experiences to develop and grow. Learn from what each other say. What is actually said on the screen, because that seems to not be a thing either, right? A good example is people who are bad at cooking in anime. You get an anime girl and she's really bad at cooking. For the entire, if a show goes on for like 3 seasons, the entire 3 seasons, that person will be bad at cooking. But in a good show, they learn to cook. And they get better at it, and they develop it, right? That's normal, that's human. We don't just stay with the same stuff over and over again. We don't just play the same mantras over and over again. We actually learn and develop and grow, and so it should be like that in anime too, because there's so much you can gain from that. There's so much pain and hardship for doing said things. And it doesn't have to be just the main character. It can be all of them. They all need to grow in their own ways and develop, right? And that's, once again, why I love Mushoku Tensei so much, because everyone has a part to play. Even the ones you don't really see too much, or they have like a 5-minute screen time, they can change and develop or learn something new, right? And you don't really know who's an internal character to the story and who isn't. From a surface point, you can tell who the main cast is, but, you know, someone new can come in and then come out very quickly. That's exciting, where people you can care for and actually create a concept around their personality can come in and out of the show willy-nilly, and you might actually care when they're gone. You might notice it when they're gone. The show has got a really good storyline. There's a lot to be said about the storyline of the show, but this kind of video isn't really to kind of spoil anything, so I'm talking just about nuanced concepts within it and not giving you anything straight, because I want people who watch this video to kind of watch the show. It's something that I want to just kind of give them a little bit, you know, give a little bit of a push. The storyline itself, not straightforward. It's not timey-wimey or separated, right? You don't really know how it's going to end up. It takes drifts and turns in different ways that usual anime story arcs don't really do. Characters separate, they realign, they find each other, they leave each other. And so it's a real breathing world with changes, dangers, and consequences. And so you don't know when a consequence of some action might come back to hit you in the ass later on in the show. There is a guide, and that helps keep the story on its rails, because otherwise the main character of the show wouldn't be able to kind of go on a story itself because of the character he is. He isn't pushing himself out there. The world is pushing him out there. Through the world pushing you out there, he needs someone to kind of sway him in certain directions to get what he wants, and a guide that comes up in the show is able to do that. The storyline is not direct, but it does have a direct pattern in it. There is one called like shaping it all, but the story itself can go on drifts and turns, and they don't feel like filler either, which is something I also want to talk about the show, which is its pacing. The show's pacing is really good. It doesn't feel like you have these down moments which are useless time wasted on screen. When the characters are relaxing or sitting, they're usually thinking or talking about something important, or something maybe not important at all, but it creates for a nice kind of gap for a relief in stress that the show places upon its characters, right? It acts as a nice little kind of like a down point, and it doesn't go past that barrier. It doesn't waste your time. And it's one of the biggest things I look in an anime that I actually really care about is this show wasting my time? Does it respect the time I'm giving it on screen for each episode? Or is it trying to draw out to the next episode because maybe they didn't have the money for the animation, or they wanted the animation to be for a certain other part, or they don't know how to bridge the gap between the start of the story and the good parts of the story, so they just add fluff in, right? Mushoku Tensei has none of that. Everything kind of is set for a purpose in Mushoku Tensei. The pacing keeps up with what the world is doing, how the characters are progressing and developing, and it does time skip quite decently quite often, but it doesn't do it in a way which makes you feel like you're missing out on a lot. It just skips stuff that would necessarily find it hard to bridge gaps, and that's what you should do when you have a story which maybe you don't have to bridge two segments together of time frame, right? You do a time skip, or you have some reason off screen to have that be the case. You don't throw filler in your viewer's face. What I also love about this show is it has languages in it. Now, not a lot of animes have languages. I respect shows that try to make their world faceted in different ways, right? Especially isekai animes have this really raw concept that could have different cultures, natures, and languages in, but it all just kind of pretexts to Japanese because the animators or the directors or whatever would find it too costly, time consuming to actually kind of develop new things, or it's just efficient, right? I understand this to a certain level, but it is missing out on another opportunity, and that is to deepen your world. Having languages which some people can't understand and some people can creates these dynamic situations where some people are left out of the loop. Characters are left lost with what's happening, whereas others are bridging the gap for them and keeping the story going. Information can be shared upon different languages that allow for other characters who don't know to have downfalls, and that is really good. It adds an entirely different dimension to story, which anime really struggles from. Everyone's on the same plane all the time in animes. It's the only difference is whether you're strong or weak in the majority of them. Do you have strength? Do you have weakness? Do you have trauma? Are you benevolent? Right? What's your complex? But it's not really many things that are structurally different or societally different. We do have rich or poor, and that's quite brought in anime a lot. Not really languages. And so It's quite nice to have a dynamic in a show where some people are at a deficit, not because they did anything wrong or because they are weak or feeble. It's just because they don't know something. They weren't aware of it. Perhaps they didn't feel like a need for it. And then only did then that need surface. The magic in Mushoku Tensei is quite standard. It's a bog standard magical fantasy world. The magic doesn't need to be great. It does its job, it sticks to its rules, and it doesn't bend or shape without needing to. Yes, the main character is quite strong, but it's not felt like it's just given out of a hat. It does feel as if it's earned. From a young age, Rudius develops his skills, exercises those talents in the world itself. He doesn't just get dropped into the world knowing everything, understanding everything, being able to fight anything, right? He gets dropped in and has to learn it all and has to start from zilch again. And so when he does pull out something that out of his hat that does seem ridiculous, you don't feel like you're being copped out or cheated. You don't feel like the show's just going, oh, right, okay, Rudius is going to fix this one. He's the reincarnated guy, right? He's got all the powers. No, he can be hurt. He can feel pain. He can lose, but he can also win against incredible dangers because of his training and the skills that he's learned. When we look at an anime, what do we really look for? Maybe we look for some form of escapism through shonen. Maybe we're looking for a deep and romantic relationship to be shown to us on screen. Something deeper through psychologicals and try to understand something about ourselves. All those are great reasons to watch anime. But very rarely does a show come along where it's able to do more than just one. Usually a show is guided in one specific direction with these terms and these kind of genres, right? But if I was to try and label Mushoku Tensei with all these, I would say it's an isekai show, but it's a psychological show, but it's a romance show. It's also a fantasy show. It's not just one. It's a majority combination. And that's how it should be, because a world should be multifaceted. It should have different endpoints and shapes. It's what makes something great. This is what we need more in shows, and that is probably going to be the conclusion of this video. Thank you very much for listening to just some thoughts or remarks on the show. I sincerely think you should give Mushoku Tensei a chance. I fully understand if you drop it due to feeling uncomfortable with certain scenes. That is fully respectable. But if you can get past those scenes or understand why they are there to some extent, you will come to understand the show is a great show regardless of those scenes, because of the other elements in the show and how they are provided to you. Thank you very much for watching. My name is Monetised, and I'll see you in the next one.